Hi, Wendy Arlowski here from Shades of Clay, and I'm excited to show you my new line of CaBezel jewelry molds. We are calling these ones holy CaBezels because every one of them has a hole in the center. The way these differ slightly from the original CaBezel jewelry molds is that each design, and there are 7 new designs, each one will come as a small, medium, and large shape. Whereas in the original CaBezel molds, there were 3 or 4 different shapes in one size only. Here are the 7 new shapes, and that is the medium size. And this is how they will come. You will pick your favorite shape or shapes, and you will get it in 3 different sizes, of course, the small, medium, and large, in both the cabochon and the bezel. We've made these quite large, and that is so that you can showcase your work in a great way, especially if you do cane work or micro mosaics or whatever you do. These will showcase your work beautifully. In this example, I've chosen to use both sides of the mold, so I've created the cabochons, and I've also created the bezels, and I've put the 2 together. That's how it works. You could, of course, just have the cab on its own. You could put a cord through there and hang it, or if this was an earring and you didn't want it to be backed with a bezel, just leave it plain. It looks beautiful. The edges are nice and smooth. You could also use the bezel in a different way. If you like to use resin, you could put an image in the bottom and then you could top it up with resin. These bezels, of course, aren't as deep as the commercial made bezels out of metal, but you can still fill them with resin or liquid clay. Here's an example where I've done that. You can see in this example that I've chosen not to use the cabochon part of the mold. All I did was use the bezel side with black clay. Once I baked my bezels, I made a template from a veneer that I had, and I inserted the thin veneer into the baked bezel. I put a little bit of liquid clay between the baked clay and my veneer just to make sure it would have a good bond. And then I baked it. Once it cooled, I decided I would add some liquid clay to the top. That just made sure that my veneer wouldn't come off. And now I don't have to seal this with anything else because the veneer is safe under the liquid clay. You could always choose to use some resin if you had some resin available. But for me this time, the liquid clay was the easiest solution. The way I've finished off my pendants is by adding a piece of steel wire to the back. I've created my own bail. Of course, there's lots of bails out there, but I wanted to use this really thick Bunicord. This is the 8mm Bunicord that we carry. Once I did this steel shape and I spread it out so that it wouldn't pull out easily from the clay, I used some more liquid clay and put a couple squares over top and rebaked it. This bail I've actually designed so that it could be interchangeable, and I'll be making another video about that later to show you how I've done it, so that you can have one cord and several different pendants to hang off of it. That's a great idea if you sell at shows, because you can sell your customer one cord in the thickness that they like, and hopefully you can sell them more than one pendant to go with that. Here's another one of the pendants that I made with the steel bail to wear on the same cord. This set I've chosen to keep the cabochon with the bezel, and I've just strung a cord through it. I've also backed the smaller shape with the baked bezels, and you could link them together to make a bracelet. You could link a few together to make a pendant. This one has no bezel. I'm not sure how I'll finish this one off, but this one was made using Pearl X powders and the Marley's fish texture stamp. I also wanted to show you that you don't always have to cut the center out. You can leave it in place and use it that way. Here are a few more examples. I just want to show you how from just one mold, one shape, you can get so many different looks. And I've just only begun to scratch the surface. These examples have all been made using various silk screens. In these examples, I not only used the silk screen there, but before baking, I used a scratching tool like this one, similar to this one, to create some texture. I then rubbed it with either artsy wax or the metallic gilding waxes. This is another example where I've used a bunch of different textures. And then I've rubbed it with the Cosmic Shimmer gilding waxes and the polish as well. And I decided on this bezel once it was baked that I didn't want to leave it plain, so I just took some chunks out with my X-Acto knife after I had put on the gilding wax. I'm just going to go over briefly how to use the CaBezel jewelry molds. There are other videos out there, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. If you choose not to cut the hole out of the center, like in the examples I have shown you, that's fine. It's pretty easy to cut around the outside. How thick your clay is just a personal preference. You, of course, are going to use your pasta machine to sheet the clay so it's nice and smooth and even. This example that I've squished with my fingers was made on one layer with the thickest setting on my pasta machine. This one was made with one layer plus another layer that was sheeted on a middle setting. So you can see how much thicker that one is. You don't really get any more depth in your bezel, but it just depends on the visual weight. My example is going to be the medium size. And you're going to need some water, you're going to need your acrylic brayer, you're going to need a very sharp scalpel, one layer of clay on the thickest setting, a patty paper or similar, something you can bake on. You don't want to be doing this straight on your tile because you won't get it off your tile without misshaping it. So I'm just misting very lightly my shape. If you use Fimo, then you know Fimo and water don't get along, so you'll have to use something else as a release. So I take my acrylic brayer in my hand like this, and I go over it several times. You'll be able to tell when the clay is up into the mold. It's not the greatest angle for you, I realize. I apologize, but I'm going to go over it this direction. And then because I'm a little heavy-handed, I tend to lean more on the right. I'm then going to turn the mold this way and repeat the process. And you can see here that the clay is up in the mold. Now, the stiffer your clay is, like let's say you're using a Kato clay, it's going to take a few more passes with the brayer. And hopefully you can see that it is up into the mold. Blue is showing everywhere. Here it looks like I haven't pressed quite enough, so I'll go over that again. And I don't want to go over just that part because I might, you know, be squishing the part beside it. So there we go. Hopefully you can see that the clay is up into the mold. I will then carefully lift the corner off to reveal the bezel. Okay, now what I generally do is I'll take a bit of tissue just to make sure there's no water. Now, I'm not sure if you can see, but it looks like I've squished this part here. I've gone a little too heavy there. So because these are translucent, it's very easy to just set the mold back on top. And you know it's on top because it doesn't move anywhere. So I'm just going to go over that one more time. There we go. Make a mark where you want to start cutting. Don't cut right into the bezel. And because it's on paper, this step is quite easy. So keep your blade at the same angle. Try to work in an area where you don't have a lot of shadow, because that makes it really difficult to see where your blade is. I'm almost back to that mark I made. Okay, I made it. So now what I'll do is I'll remove the excess clay. Now for the tricky part, and this is the only tricky part, and that's cutting out the center. So I found that I even had difficulties making that nice and smooth. I cut it out, and then I found that after it was baked, I would go around with my blade, and I'd made a few burrs, so I would just kind of scrape the burrs off. I even stuck some sandpaper in the center. Well, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm not a huge fan of sanding, so I came up with a better way. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the easy way. This is the one I just cut. This one just came out of the oven, so it's quite warm. I found it's a lot easier to cut small shapes when the clay is warm. You still have to make sure you have a sharp scalpel. Okay, I've cut all the way around. And hopefully you saw how easy that was. Now, if you decide that you want it to be a little bit more perfect, once it's cooled, you can do something like that and just, shave off any burrs. You could also sand in there, but I really don't think it's necessary. If you want to hide that a little bit, what you could do is you could color that part with a gold marker or some inks just to distract your eye. Now, I decided I was going to just do a rough cut of this, and I'll show you why. I know not everyone is comfortable using a sharp scalpel or an X-Acto blade. I found that while the clay was still warm, it was quite easy to use a sharp pair of scissors to cut around the outside. Be careful that you don't cut into the bezel, because that will show. And there you have it. Now if you want to, you can rub this along some sandpaper just to take that off. You could also, you could leave it like that. You could also take some gilding polish and cover up that as well. So anyway, I hope that I have simplified the process for you, and I hope that you find the new Holy CaBezel molds useful. Thanks.